Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada Sportsbook.
Hold on. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Game Over Winnipeg. My name is Lyss, one of your hosts. We're here to break down the Jets game against the Montreal Canadiens today, and I am joined by my wonderful guest, Jared. Jared, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So Jared is someone that Andrew, of course, as you all know, Andrew, who is our manager over here at Game Over, was strongly recommended to me to have come on the show today and talk about the Jets versus Habs game because Andrew's from the Montreal market. So Jared, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first to start off and why you're here talking with me today?
Yeah, I'm the deputy managing editor at Habs Eyes on the Prize. Obviously a site that Andrew knows very well, and Mark as well, actually, who's another one of the hosts at the Game Over Montreal, and I talk about the Canadians. So it's a lot of fun and nice to be on the other side for once. I'm joining you guys today.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to talk about this one, and I know that I have a lot of friends in the Habs market and whatnot. A lot of them were making jokes today about, how the result of this game was going to go and whatnot. And it definitely was not the way that they were expecting. And honestly, not really what I was expecting either, considering it was more like the Winnipeg Jets versus the Laval Rocket tonight. So what are your initial thoughts on that game that we just saw?
You know, there's one game, I think it was last year. Yeah, it was last year, where the Canadians were just hit by COVID and they had guys called up from basically the ECHL because they had nobody else to call up. And they played a really close game against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And my reaction after that game was effort and heart. It replaces talent a lot of the time, and I think that when the odds are stacked against you, I mean these are still professional athletes, and even the worst NHL team wins 20 games a year, and this just happened to be one of those games for the Canadians. But I just think that what's happening is that it's giving an opportunity for players who are playing well to get a chance. And a lot of the players who are with the Laval Rocket have been playing better than most of the regulars on the Canadians. And somehow Evgeny Dadonov decided to score and double his goal scoring numbers this game. And Samuel Montembeault played well in goal, and somehow they won. I don't really know how to explain it except that they're NHL players still, and what that it could happen. I think that I remember one year the Canadians made the playoffs or just missed the playoffs, and the worst team in the league, Detroit, went 4-0 against them, and it just happens. And everything was pointing against Montreal in this one, and oftentimes when so many things are pointing against you, it gives you the freedom to kind of come out and play a game that people don't expect, and I think that's what happened today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm definitely of that mentality as well. Like at the end of the day, like you said, they're all professional hockey players and any game can go any way. Like, notoriously, who is it? It's like the Leafs against Buffalo. They lose like every single time for some weird reason and stuff like that. Like, it happens. But I don't know. Like at the very start of this game, there were a couple things that I saw and I was like, okay, yeah, these are the Montreal Canadiens and whatnot. But as the game went on, I thought that team, like, they looked good to me. Like, I was impressed. Like, it was a very interesting. I thought that they really caught the Jets in transition. I thought that they were really good at, breaking out of their own zone and putting the pressure on the Jets and not getting stopped by the Jets at the blue line, like, at all, ever, which I don't know if it means the Habs are good or the Jets are bad, but doesn't really matter in a game like that, right? Like, the way it happens, it happens. But I thought that, particularly that movement through the neutral zone, that the Habs looked quite good tonight.
Yeah, and you know what? They're coming off of a game against the Rangers where they won in Madison Square Garden, and it was really one of their best team games in a long time. And obviously, two players who played in that game were added to injured reserve this morning. They called up two players. They had to play with 11 forwards because they had no forwards left on the roster. And I think that Mike Matheson came back today, and he's the one player that I think Montreal missed the most. And even when he was playing, he wasn't really 100%. And I think that having him in the lineup really helps with that transition. Justin Barron had a really good game today, and he's one of those guys that can really help in transition. And let's face it, the Canadians don't really have a defense core that's good in transition, but those two are guys that can step up. You're not going to see Joel Edmondson or David Savard or even Arber Xhekaj really, lead the way in transition. But I think that those two guys coming back in the lineup maybe gave them an opportunity to show what they can do in transition. Yeah, I mean they started the game off really well. I think it was like 7-1 in shots in
Yeah.
the first 10 minutes in the game, and I think that just the Jets scored first on the power play, but I think that they just feed off of that. Like it's a growth mindset in Montreal, and I think that there's going to be a lot of games where they aren't playing very well, but when they get it together, they're not that bad. And you saw it a little bit at the beginning of the season. They've had a lot of injuries. They have a lot of injuries now, and I think that that's just something that is really you know part of what this coaching staff is trying to hammer home is just you know, even before the game today, Martin St. Louis was like, he was asked about the injuries, and he was like, "Yep, it's time for other players to maybe steal a chair." And I think that that's kind of the mindset is like, I'm getting a chance in the NHL and getting maybe more minutes than I would normally. I'm gonna take the opportunity and run with it. And I think that when the Canadians can get secondary scoring and score 4 goals without the Caulfield Suzuki line doing much, it's a recipe for most teams to have success, and definitely with Montreal, that's what happens.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that makes a lot of sense. That secondary scoring piece is huge for teams, and I totally agree with what Marty St. Louis was saying about the injuries, right? Because we used to make jokes a couple years back. It was always the injuries making better lineup decisions than Paul Maurice since 2015, and but it is interesting because there's no way of knowing what you have until you see it, right? And the only way you'll see those guys get those chances is when injury permits, right? So it's opportune for some guys, as unfortunate as it is for the others. And you never wish injury on players, but it is nice to see what you have. And I think, at least from my perspective, there were a lot of guys tonight when Dan Robertson was calling the game and he'd say a guy's name, and I was like, who? and they looked good. So that's definitely
Yeah,
encouraging for a Habs fan, I'm sure.
yeah. I mean, the thing going into the season with the Montreal Canadiens, they have a lot of forwards on one-way contracts, and it meant that guys like Essi Linen, Raphael Harvey Pinard, really there was no room for them to make the team, even though they probably should have. Out of training camp, they've been some of the best players, in the AHL for the last couple of years. And I think that what this opportunity brings them is that they have a roster spot now that they might have not obviously had a couple months ago. And I think that it's showing that you know I'm not going to say that it's forcing Martin St. Louis' hand, but it kind of is because there's a couple of guys in that lineup that haven't been playing well. But to their credit, two of them were Evgeny Dadonov and Mike Hoffman, and they both scored. So I think that it also pushes some of the veterans as well, right? Because you see these young kids getting an opportunity, and Yessi Linen started on the first line with Suzuki and Caulfield today. And I think that it's a message to the veterans saying, hey, if you want that spot, if you want to play, you're going to have to earn it. And I think that Montreal's in a spot right now where they can just kind of play guys like that. Like, they're gonna be trading guys at some point between now and March. There's a lot of guys who are going to be pending free agents as well, and I think that it's just it put pressure on a lot of people, and I think that that's something that's happened. I mean, Dadonov has been playing well the last couple of games, doesn't really have the points to show for it, but he comes in and scores 2 big goals, and I think that it's a trickle down effect, and I think that that's something that was key for Montreal in this one. And look, Winnipeg is going to be in the playoffs this year. Montreal is not going to be in the playoffs this year. I don't think this is a wide ranging game that's going to show the fortunes of these two teams. I think it's just one of those games where Montreal was at home. They feed off the home crowd and have an opportunity to pull away in a game. And it's a good moment for them. Obviously, the Barons had a good moment. The two brothers playing in the NHL for the first time. So, it was a good game. But yeah, I mean, look, Winnipeg's a better team than Montreal. I don't think anyone's going to deny that or say anything else. But Tonight, Montreal was the better team, and I think that showed up in the results.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that particularly some lineup decisions for the Winnipeg Jets tonight, were kind of interesting. And I think, to the credit or to cater to some of my Jets people I know who are listening right now in the chat, we'll have to talk a little bit about Sam Gagner was a healthy scratch tonight, which is something that a lot of people, Sam Gagner is a fine hockey player, like he's good, but, some of the alternatives in the bottom six are probably worse options than Sam Gagner, and there was definitely none of that secondary scoring or anything like that tonight. It was pretty quiet across the board for those scoring chances, but especially down there, like they weren't too great. And Ville Heinola drew in place of Dylan Sandberg, as a lot of people were expecting him to after getting called up today. Did you happen to notice anything about Ville Heinola? I'm not going to talk too much from my perspective because everyone knows how I feel about that player. But did you have any thoughts on Ville Heinola tonight?
Every time I've seen him, and I've seen him in both the AHL with Manitoba and the NHL, it, he was someone that entering, in his draft year, he was someone that Montreal was looking at defenseman that year. He was someone that we looked at eyes on the prize, and it just feels like it's hard to say whether it's that he hasn't gotten an opportunity or whether he's just so up and down. It kind of reminds me a little bit of how the Jets treated Samaniku, where he would seem like he would be fine in the AHL and then in the NHL not really have the opportunity. But I mean, it's tough for young defensemen in the NHL, and I think that especially when you're playing for a team that's looking to compete, you don't have that leeway for errors. And I think that that's something that is hard. And obviously there's a new coaching staff in Winnipeg this year. But when you're up and down a lot, it's tough to really get bearings. So I mean, it's it's hard to notice a third pairing defenseman a lot of the time, especially as somebody who doesn't watch the team very often. But I mean, and every time I've seen him, it's like, okay, where's he going to take that next step? And I think that that's kind of where he is right now. I don't know if that's where you're going at or not, but that's kind of my impression of him is just okay. At a certain point, you have to forget where a player was drafted, and just see where they are. And I think that he's just kind of in that kind of bubble zone where he's maybe a little bit not I don't want to say too good for the AHL, but obviously at a high level there. And when you get to the NHL, there's just a little bit less time and space to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head in a lot of those things. And I forgot the Sam Niku got put on or waivers last fall and went to Montreal. So, yes, the treatment is similar. Very different hockey players, but a very similar
Yeah,
treatment with the yo-yoing and then not given enough of a chance to really see what the player can do at the compete level of the NHL. But only reason I ask is because Billy was on for the first three goals that Montreal scored and then was benched for like a period and a half. So it was definitely not his best showing tonight. But again, he sat for a month or whatever, and he's been press boxed and back in the AHL. I think he's been called up and down, I think like 5 times this year, realistically. Like, it's pretty ridiculous. So I just thought that was, and I will I'll be honest, when he's one of my favorite players, but tonight was a little bit of a rougher showing from him. But it was a little bit of a rougher showing from everyone, but I do think you make a good point about having to forget when a player was drafted, because I do think that that's something that frustrates me is when people look, and this doesn't really bode to my point with Ville Heinola because he was a first round pick, but when people are like,
yeah,
oh, this guy was a first round pick, so he must pan out. It's like, oh, this guy was a fifth round pick, so we don't want to give him as much of a leash. I hate that mentality. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. So I'm glad we're on the same page on that one.
yeah. I mean, it comes to a point where I think it's what probably 4 years after he was drafted, five, maybe five. But it just comes to a point where it stuff like that doesn't matter. Like you look at Montreal in particular. I mean, a guy like Arber Xhekaj, like he was a free agent like 18 months ago, and now he's playing regular reps in the NHL a year out of junior, and it's so weird to me, that whole story. But I mean, it's just at a certain point you just have to let the players show you where they belong, and there's something to be said for development, obviously, and first round picks are going to get a little bit more leash that's just the reality. Even though it's a different coaching staff, the guy who drafted him is still around, so there's still that pressure, I think. But I mean, yeah, it's tough to be a young player on a competing team, and you can look up and down the NHL and the same thing. I mean, look at the Rangers and guys like Alexis Lafreniere and Capo Caco and Keandre Miller and all those guys are, it took them a while to get a bearing on a Rangers team that's competing. And you look at the flip side of that in a team like New Jersey or Ottawa, where the young guys can just play and not have to worry about making mistakes because the teams don't expect them to do much. And I think there's something to be said for development. And obviously, it's not like a end all be all. I mean, good teams develop players and play them in the NHL, but I think that when you're a bubble guy like that, it's a little bit tougher for sure.
Absolutely. There are two players in particular that I want to talk to you about. But first, I'm going to share a word from our sponsors. So if you think you know what way it's going to go, make your bet with Sports Interaction. Whether it's hockey, football, or basketball, Sports Interaction has you covered. Bet pregame, live, and play are on one of our many prop bets. Sports Interaction makes it easy to deposit, play, and cash out. Join now and see all sports betting has to offer. Want to bet? Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. That's sportsinteraction.com/SDPN 19 plus. Please play responsibly. So, first player I want to talk about here, Jonathan Kovacevic. So, obviously, from a Jets fan perspective, Jonathan Kovacevic is almost like Ville Heinola in the sense where it was, fringe player, bubble player, very good results in the AHL, just couldn't quite crack the AHL roster, and unfortunately not waivers exempt this year. A lot of people were bummed to lose him on waivers. A lot of others, were of the mind, it's if he's a guy that you have to put on waivers, he's probably not that instrumental to your team anyway, so I'm sure you'll be fine. And the Jets are pretty deep at left D, so it wasn't the biggest deal. But at the same time, assets are assets, and losing a guy like that for free, a lot of people were disappointed. From a Habs fan perspective, what are your thoughts on Jonathan Kovacevic, and what do you think of that player?
Yeah, he's been really good. I mean, it's funny because the Canadians have enrolled like four or five rookie defensemen at times this season, mostly due to injuries. I mean, Joel Edmondson this time, David Savard this time, Michael Matheson this time. So it's kind of they're forced into it. And Kovacevic is obviously one of those rookies, but he's been solid. And you know, it's really tough to judge the Canadians' defense because so much of it is kind of a train wreck at times where the whole system kind of breaks down at times and they're kind of in a transition. They have a new defense coach, and it's all kind of, like I said, you have like four or five rookies, it's going to be ugly at times. But there have been times when the veterans have been the worst defenders on the team, and the rookies have kind of led the way. I mean, Caden Gooley, who's out right now, oftentimes was the team's most used defenseman, even when the veterans have been playing. So it's a situation where they're kind of thrown into situations they might not normally be in. But if you look at some of the advanced metrics, Kovacevic has been one of the most steady defensemen on the team, and I think that part of that is because he's just kind of just a solid player and not too flashy, and he knows his role kind of thing. And I think that that's a situation that is, I mentioned before about letting guys develop. That's a perfect situation because this the leash he has in Montreal is not the same leash he'd have in Winnipeg. And you mentioned Heinola being benched after being on the ice with 3 goals. The Canadians aren't benching anyone. They're going to let guys play and let guys learn. And I think that that's a good environment for a player who's kind of been on that bubble. And I think that it's helped them really develop. And that he's been a healthy scratch a couple times just because they've been rotating guys in and out. They obviously played seven D tonight. So, but he's someone who's impressed me coming off of waivers, and his first game with the team was in the home opener in the regular season. Like he didn't really have the preseason game with the team. They just kind of claimed him on waivers and said, "Okay, go." Again, partially because of injuries, and Michael Matheson missed the start of the season. So, he's been really good, and it's going to be interesting to see where he fits in because as things develop in Montreal, there's obviously not going to be room for all these young defensemen. So it's going to be interesting to see who kind of stays and who kind of gets shuffled out of the picture. But him not being waiver exempt probably plays a little bit in his favor. They can send other guys down if they have to, if it gets to that point. But with all the injuries, uh, they might not need to. But yeah, I mean, he's been really good, and I think that he's not going to be a top pairing guy. He's not going to be a guy like that's going to be on your power play or put up lots of points. But he's just solid. He just does the good things that help teams win games.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's good to hear. A lot of us really like Kovacevic, especially as a person. Like, he was a really nice guy, and there were some good pieces about him and some off the ice stuff and whatnot. So it's good to see him succeeding there, and it's the kind of thing that, like you said, like these teams that are quote unquote better. I don't think the Winnipeg Jets are like a top of the Central good team. Like, I'm still a little pessimistic about them. But they are, kind of objectively a better team than the Montreal Canadiens, and it's the kind of thing where it's like those strong teams. Like, if you look back at Tampa Bay, how many young guys did they have to shuffle out of there because they were so strong that there were guys that you couldn't just let them cook on the bottom pairing because they had guys who were just better, and you don't have as much time and patience for these kids when you're in a win now type of mode. So that is the one thing that's nice. You mentioned, New Jersey and Ottawa, and yeah, 100%. So it's good to see these guys get their shot. And you never know. Like you said, there may be some guys that get shuffled out of there, but if he's had the chance to play as many NHL games now as he has, maybe he's a piece that a fringe playoff team moves for a late round pick for at the deadline just to shore up their depth a little bit or something. And that wouldn't have happened likely before if he was just in the AHL and stuff like that. So you're happy for him, and you hope that the best comes from it. So the second player I want to talk about is Pierre-Luc Dubois, of course. So Pierre-Luc Dubois is my favorite NHL player. That is a well-known fact. And so every time there's a Montreal Canadiens game, we play him twice in a year, right? First game of the year this season, it was in Winnipeg, so it was fine. But today, I was like, oh, he's going to Montreal. It's against Montreal, all this kind of stuff. I was like, I just need to log off Twitter. I don't want to read some of his quotes from his interviews. We know this guy wants to play in Montreal. But as a Habs fan, what are your thoughts on this whole Pierre-Luc Dubois situation? Do you like the player? Do you even want the player? Do you think the player wants to come to you? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, look, he's a great player. He's a legitimate top six at worst center in the NHL. Great on the power play. He's a guy that any team would want. And it's kind of weird to be in a situation where a guy's like, yeah, I want to be there. And he didn't say that. It's kind of like rumors and implied and things like that. And the whole media thing today and asking questions like, what do you expect him to say? He's not going to say anything. He's not going to be like, oh yeah, can I switch dressing rooms right now? Like, it's just a weird situation, and I'm not getting my hopes up. Like, whatever happens, happens. But I mean, obviously, he's a guy that would obviously help the Montreal Canadiens. But I mean, it's just weird. It just makes it awkward for everything. And I think that obviously, when it came out in the summer, he was probably look, these things come out because somebody wants them to come out. And I think that obviously he was probably trying to angle for a trade or something, or maybe angle to, not get a long-term contract. I don't really know what the reasoning would be, but I mean, it's just, for me, it's just weird. Like, I hear that he's coming, it's like, okay. But I mean, you don't want to get your hopes up or expect it to happen because, you know, there's a lot of things that can change between now and then. And obviously, it's kind of weird to see Rick Bowness be like, yeah, well, I'm going to try and convince him to stay. It's like, he's on your team. Like, it's just a weird situation. And I don't
I
know if there's
know.
been, I don't even know, I can't even think of another situation where this has happened with any other team and any other player. Like, it's never like, oh yeah, he definitely wants, like, you don't hear Austin Matthews be like, oh yeah, he wants to go to Arizona when he's a free agent. Like, there's people like saying that he might want to go there, but I mean, no one's actually saying like, oh yeah, he's going to be there. And so I just think it's weird. And obviously him starting the foundation and speaking to the media, it's like, okay, like, obviously it makes sense to speak to the Quebec media about it and things like that. But it's just, the Montreal media is kind of relentless and ask things that don't need to be asked. And people asking about him coming to Montreal, like, I don't understand why they're asking him. But I mean, as a Canadians, as someone who follows the Canadians, like, yeah, he would help the team. Yeah, it would be good to see him come to Montreal, but it's just weird. situation to be in. Like it's like okay, it's like 2 years away from his free agency too. Like it's not even like it's this summer. So yeah, it's just weird, and I think that it's you know, especially considering the high profile way he was acquired by Winnipeg, and obviously who went the other way in that trade, Patrick Laine, and it's just a weird situation. And I think that we're going to hear it again the 2 times next year, and it's not going to go away until he either signs a contract with Montreal or Winnipeg, and that's how it's going to end. And it's just, but for right now, it's just my reaction is just it's weird, and we'll see what happens in a year and a half, I guess.
Yeah, it is super odd because it's giving the same vibes as Jim Rutherford's press conference the other day when he's like, we've been talking to other candidates when they literally have their head coach right there. It's like when you're talking and
Yeah,
it's like, oh, we'll do what we can to make him stay. It's like, dude, he's under contract right now. Like they don't talk to other restricted free agents like that. Like it is weird. I definitely get that, but it's just been definitely a whole thing, and it's just so funny the way that you're reading some of the responses, and some of them are just walking around the questions so much of like people like, do you see a long-term future in Winnipeg? He's like, I'm worried about winning right now. It's like, okay. But he had one quote today that I want to pull up and read that I actually liked. Usually I hate Pierre-Luc Dubois' media answers, but I like this one. And it says, Pierre-Luc Dubois today. I'm born here. I have family here. I have friends here. I grew up here. Those roots are the same as any other French guy in the NHL. For me, it wasn't anything about how can I get closer. It was how can I help people from where I am, or how can I help people from where I'm from. And I like that. That was about the foundation, of course. And I really like that. Like just the kind of, it's not how do I get closer to it. It's how can I help regardless of where I am. So I thought that was a good answer, actually. So that was nice.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, people are reading into this foundation thing, but I mean, it's about more than just where you play, right? Like
Mhm.
it's, I think I saw something the other day where it was actually Vincent Lecavalier who started this
Yes,
foundation, and Pierre-Luc Dubois started. Like Vincent Lecavalier never played for Montreal. He obviously works
exactly.
for the team now, but he never played for Montreal. There were obviously rumors at some point that he would be traded here, and I remember this is going off topic, but in the 2009 All-Star game, I went to like the Fan Fest, and they literally had the Cavalier jerseys like printed in like by like the vendors that were there, and it's like
Oh
okay,
my gosh.
obviously he never ended up playing in Montreal or getting traded here, but it just I don't think they're related. I think that starting the foundation before he comes to Montreal is a good idea because obviously the Montreal media is going to talk to him. But I mean, it doesn't. I'm not going to read anything more into that. And yeah, I mean, it's just weird because a lot of players, the whole rap against Montreal is that French Canadian players don't want to play here. So when one is like so openly or rumored to be openly wanting to play here, it's a little bit weird. It's like okay, are you sure? Like, is this really real? But I mean, at the same time, I mean, he's playing. Like, he's not like he's sitting out or sulking or anything.
Pulling
Like
a
he
Jonathan
he has a
Drouin.
contract. I mean, kinda.
Yeah,
But I
no.
mean, Jonathan Drouin didn't say he wanted to play in Montreal. He just wasn't happy in Tampa, right? So it's a
Right.
little bit different situation. But
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a weird situation. But I think that what he said today is perfectly fine. And I'm not reading into the foundation and things like that. The timing about that is when you want to promote it, you do it when you're coming to Montreal. It just makes
Totally.
sense.
Yeah.
But I think that all the other stuff is just noise at this point, and it's not good for it. I'm sure he's not happy that it came out either because he has to answer these questions all the time,
Oh yeah.
and things like that. So just one of those situations where maybe a friend talked a little bit too much and said things that they weren't supposed to say, and that's where we are. But yeah, I mean. I have a lot of respect for people who give back to the community, whether they play in the city or not. So yeah, it's that's a good thing. And yeah, like I said, Vincent Lecavalier started it. He didn't play in Montreal, so I don't think there's anything more to that than just trying to help out.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's the same thing, when I become a millionaire and I move to another province or country, of course, like I'd want to give back to Winnipeg too, sort of thing. So I think it makes sense and the timing agreed. But we're running out of time on our Zoom call here. So we'll just circle back to the game that we just watched here. So yeah, I thought just generally speaking, the Winnipeg Jets were slow. Their puck management was poor. They were creating very, very, very little in the offensive zone on the limited chances they did have. I didn't think they were doing enough to create actual, strong high danger chances out of it. But game's an outlier. The Jets have been iffy in the last few games. They had one really good one, and they've had some stinkers, and it is what it is. But generally speaking, I think the team is still in decent shape, and these games happen. I'm not too worried. But that being said, from a Montreal Canadiens perspective, like when you have your AHL-esque roster out there and playing against a team that's, just landed top spot in the Central, like it feels good to play those games with heart. And obviously the whole Barron brothers thing tonight was super cute, and they're nice to see some depth scoring from the Montreal Canadiens. So I'm sure from your perspective, it's a fun game. It's a good game to win. And, for the Jets, you just regroup and move to the next one.
Yeah, and I wonder how much, obviously, you don't want to admit anything like that, or the players wouldn't admit it, but I wonder how much they're looking towards that game against Toronto, and kind of looking towards that because, yeah, I mean, Montreal's an easy team to look over at this point. Yeah, I mean, it was a good game. Like I said, Montreal's coming off of a really good team win against the Rangers, and when you have guys that want to try. And I'm not saying that the guys who are out of the lineup weren't trying, but when you have guys that kind of put that effort and push everybody else, it makes a difference. And I think that's something that we saw tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up the general show here. So Jared, thank you so much for coming and joining me. I always love these Canadian market shows because I just feel like, with the way that TSN and Sports Network, I feel like, you hear a lot more about the other teams. So when you play, you're looking for a lot more things because you know a lot about the teams and stuff like that. So it's always a ton of fun. Do you have any socials, any sites, anything you want to plug for our listeners out there?
Yeah, haveseyesontheprize.com, if you want to read about the Canadians. But we also have a lot of draft coverage coming up and things like that as well. And my Twitter is Jared Book. Pretty simple and yeah, Canadian centric. I cover women's hockey as well, and I'll be covering the AHL All-Star game that's in
That's
Laval
right.
in
Yeah.
a couple of weeks as well. So lots of stuff there, and it's yeah. I mean, if you want a Montreal Canadiens perspective, it's a great place to be, and we have lots of good stuff coming up as
Excellent.
well.
Well, make sure you tell Declan Chisholm that we say hello from Winnipeg when you're at the All-Star game. We're proud of that guy. So, Jared, thank you so much. For those of you listening live, thank you so much for joining us in the chat and joining us on the stream. For those of you listening back on podcast tomorrow, I hope you didn't PVR this game and come home excited to watch a Jets game. If you did, I'm so sorry. But make sure you check out SDPN Sports on Twitter and all of the other content they got going on their pages. As always, my name is Lyss. My Twitter is Lyss Hood, and you'll also find my co-host Brady, NHL Chunky, on Twitter, where we talk about all things Jets. Jared, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Game over! Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada Sportsbook.